While being in the U.S. as a Black American, it sometimes feels sad to know that the U.S. has wasted money on everything one can imagine, but it never took any practical steps to pay slavery reparations. Today, a new issue has unfolded in the form of the Israel-Hamas conflict, and the U.S. has run toward it to finance it. It has been the U.S. habit from the very start. It likes to finance wars and conflicts, putting its nose into every matter. But back at home, its own Black citizens have been deprived of their right to get long overdue reparations. As a Black American, you have to know how much money the U.S. has spent financing wars it has nothing to do with. It's essential to be aware of the country you live in that calls you its citizens, but does very little for you. So how much has the U.S. spent on wars in the past years, and how does it compare to paying for reparations? What if the U.S. spent this money on slavery reparations? Let's know everything about that in this video.
The Black History Archives.
The historical background is complex, yet the underlying principle is straightforward. Slavery significantly contributed to the United States' economic rise. However, it had a completely opposite impact on the enslaved individuals and their descendants, stripping them of wages, property, civil rights, and freedom. Despite the abolition of legal slavery with the 13th Amendment in 1865, there has been no sustained effort to address this imbalance, reinforcing the argument for the ongoing relevance of reparations. Post-slavery bias policies, including segregation, labor discrimination, redlining, and mass incarceration, have perpetuated a racial wealth gap. The sole federal attempt at reparations was discontinued after President Lincoln's assassination. Later, over 150 members of Congress supported a bill to establish a commission to study reparations, with a slight majority of Americans favoring this approach. Even though federal reparations have been provided to Native Americans and Japanese internment victims, nothing was paid to African Americans. Current proposals for federal reparations involve direct payments to African Americans and investments in economic development within the Black community. In 2020, California became the first state to form a task force to study and propose reparations. On March 15, 2021, the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States pledged $100 million in reparations for descendants of enslaved people previously held by the order. $100 seemed like making a mockery. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. Comparing this with what was being offered back in 1865, it seems that the U.S. today wants to make fun of African Americans. You should know that on January 16, 1865, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman issued Field Order No. 15, announcing the allocation of large tracts of confiscated land to newly freed Black populations. This order granted approximately 400,000 acres, including Georgia's Sea Islands, to be distributed in parcels of up to 40 acres of tillable ground. The rights of the new owners were to be protected by military authorities until they could defend themselves or Congress could regulate their title. The freed people were to govern these lands themselves, subject only to U.S. military authority and acts of Congress. The land grant initiative became colloquially known as 40 acres and a mule, with the mule aspect added later when Sherman authorized the Army to lend mules to the settlers. News of Sherman's order quickly spread, and the islands seemingly transformed into autonomous Black farming communities overnight, prompting the residents to rename them Sherman Land gratefully. However, this federal reparations experiment was short-lived. Following Abraham Lincoln's assassination in April 1865, his successor, Andrew Johnson, nullified the program and returned the land to the original planters. Since then, for over 150 years, various groups have advocated for reparations. In stark contrast, the U.S. government has not pursued reparations since the Lincoln administration. Despite introducing a bill to study reparations in 1989, the House of Representatives has yet to vote on it. It seems that the U.S. elites never wanted to pay slavery reparation. To provide context for the cost of slavery reparations, It would be less expensive than proposed programs like Medicare for All at $20.5 trillion and the Green New Deal at an estimated $50 to $90 trillion. Various reports have suggested different amounts to be paid to each Black American. According to California's task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans' 500-page report, each Black American should be paid $1.2 million. Other reports suggest $360,000, while some ask the U.S. to pay $151 million for each person, considering the moral element. But wherever the U.S. is asked to pay, it says it does not have the money. If that's the case, how did it spend trillions in financing wars? According to a detailed report by the Watson Institute, the U.S. has spent a staggering $8 trillion on financing wars since 9/11. It excludes what the U.S. has spent on Ukraine and the latest development in Israel apart from what it spent before the 21st century. Yes, $8 trillion have been spent in only 22 years on just financing wars. It's interesting to know that the U.S. spent $300 million per day, or approximately $50,000 for every one of Afghanistan's 40 million inhabitants for 2 decades in Afghanistan. In the 20 years since September 11, 2001, the U.S. funneled over $2 trillion into the war effort. In simpler terms, the U.S. invested more in deterring the Taliban than the combined net worths of Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and the 30 wealthiest billionaires in America. The financial burden extends into the future as the United States financed the war through borrowed money. Brown University researchers project that over $500 billion in interest has already been paid, included in the $2.26 trillion total. Looking ahead to 2050, the cost of interest alone on the Afghan war debt could soar to $6.5 trillion, equating to $20,000 for every U.S. citizen. What's more, the total cost of the Iraq War was $3 trillion, a figure surpassing earlier estimates, including the Bush administration's 2003 projection of a $50 billion to $60 billion war. The U.S. has allocated $113.4 billion in emergency funding to assist Ukraine. If we see what the U.S. spent before 2000, World War II cost the U.S. $4 trillion, while the Vietnam War cost $1 trillion in today's price. Conflicts like the Korean War, the Gulf War, and various others cost the U.S. about $5 trillion in total. By adding all this, it becomes a total of about $19 trillion. If the U.S. had spent this money on paying reparation, then every African American would have gotten nearly $404,000. Even if this amount is too small, at least it would have made a difference than what wars brought. Critics argue that the U.S. government consistently channels substantial financial resources into funding military operations, interventions, and global conflicts. The defense budget frequently surpasses trillions of dollars, highlighting the considerable investment in overseas military efforts. But slavery reparation never gets such type of focus and budget. It surfaces the argument that the U.S. was fundamentally constructed to systematically favor white individuals, particularly through the institution of slavery. The enduring effects of this historical injustice manifest in present-day disparities in wealth, education, and opportunities. The failure to address reparations is a perpetuation of systemic racism. Doesn't it feel that the U.S. was never made for Black people? Isn't it true that today, the Black population of America should demand reparations from the very presidents who want their vote? Let us know your thoughts on how Black Americans should unite to compel the U.S. government to pay reparations before wasting another penny. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archivist and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.